The first big thing is obvious. It is going to relate to what we saw in Hartford, Connecticut on Wednesday night, and it's that UConn sent a message with its win against St. John's. And look, I never questioned UConn as a national championship contender. I never questioned the idea of UConn going to its third Final Four in 4 seasons under Dan Hurley. I also never questioned the idea of UConn bouncing back from St. John's beating the Huskies a couple of weeks ago at Madison Square Garden. But what UConn did to St. John's in Hartford on Wednesday night was something that I had never seen before in my life. Now, why do I say that? When you think about the great coaches that we have now in college basketball, and there's a number of them, only 3 have won multiple national championships. Bill Self, Dan Hurley, and Rick Pitino. And in all my years covering Rick Pitino's teams, going back all the way to his early years at Louisville, I have never seen another team do to Rick Pitino's team what we saw UConn do on Wednesday night. The final score was 72-40. It felt a lot worse than that. It was a 32-point win. It felt like 50 or 60. The 40 points scored were the fewest points ever scored under a team coached by Rick Pitino, going back from Boston University to Providence, to Kentucky, to Louisville, to Iona, to St. John's. The 32-point margin of victory was also the most ever by a Rick Pitino team at St. John's. Prior to Wednesday night, the biggest loss that St. John's had suffered under Rick Pitino was a 16-point loss to Michigan in his second game as St. John's head coach during the 23-24 season. This wasn't just a blowout. It was a dominant performance by UConn, who, in my opinion, had its most dominant performance against a high-level opponent since UConn beat Illinois in the 2024 Elite Eight when the Huskies went on a 30-0 run in the second half at TD Garden in Boston. And there has been a bit of a narrative that has been shifted over the past couple of weeks that Duke, that Michigan, and that obviously Arizona were in a class by themselves at the top of the sport. That narrative is now over because the UConn team we saw last night looked like it could easily be in the ring with Duke, with Michigan, with Arizona. And look, UConn has a different dynamic than other teams that are at the top of the sport. And what do I mean by this? Part of the positive of being in a power conference is you have quad one opportunity after quad one opportunity. And when you are in a league like the Big East is right now in 2026, and you are not getting a Pez dispenser full of quad one opportunities, and you're constantly beating up on teams that are not in a situation where they are going to be close to the NCAA tournament, it makes it very difficult to keep your players constantly engaged. Because I remember sitting once at a diner/deli with Bob Knight, and he told me and the other people at the table something that I thought was very, very on point. When you are dealing with 18 to 22-year-old kids, sometimes the greatest opponent that you deal with is human nature. And if you're UConn and you're in a conference like the Big East, where only 3 of the 11 teams in the conference are projected to be in the NCAA tournament, you are going to have potential potholes in your schedule, and it's going to be difficult to keep the kids engaged. Game in, game out, practice in, practice out. That was not the case Wednesday night. Now, I have said since last summer, when I have sat in this seat and given you content beyond content about the Big East, about St. John's and UConn, I have said that I expected multiple situations to emerge between St. John's and UConn in the 25-26 season. I thought there would be at least 3 meetings. We've seen 2. I would be shocked if a third meeting did not happen in the Big East tournament title game at Madison Square Garden on March 14th, the night before Selection Sunday. Now, with that said, for all intents and purposes, we also saw the blueprint of what could lead UConn to its third Final Four in the last 4 years. And that blueprint is obviously built around Tarris Reed, who was absolutely ridiculous against Zubi Ejiofor in the middle on Wednesday night in Hartford. 20 points, 11 rebounds, 6 assists, 6 block shots, excuse me. Now, one of the things that we have to talk about in terms of consistent things that have resonated throughout UConn's run here under Dan Hurley. One of the biggest things that was a linchpin in those back-to-back national title runs in 23 and 24 was the element at the center spot. In 2023, you had Adama Sanogo and Donovan Clingan splitting up the time. In 2024, you had Donovan Clingan and Samson Johnson splitting up the time. When Reed plays at this level, like he's one of the best big men in college basketball, and Eric Ryba gives you a player who's one of the best reserves in college basketball, now you have a formula that has been a common theme for Dan Hurley's teams at UConn that have went far in the NCAA tournament. As far as St. John's goes, you have to obviously burn the tape. You have to obviously be in a situation where you are going to turn the page quickly. But now in terms of the race of the Big East, in one 40-minute stretch, all of the pressure has went off UConn and it's went on to St. John's in terms of the race for a regular season championship. Now, why do I say that? Well, it's real simple. UConn is in a situation where it is going to play Seton Hall at home this weekend and then go on the road to take on Marquette in Milwaukee. St. John's has to come back to Madison Square Garden and play Villanova. It will also have to host Georgetown, and then it has to go on the road to play Seton Hall in Newark. St. John's clearly has the more difficult schedule. If both teams win out, a common opponent tiebreaker will decide who gets the 1 seed in the Big East tournament. But to make things obviously in layman's terms, if both teams win out, St. John's and UConn will share a Big East regular season title, which would set up an epic Big East tournament title game March 14th at Madison Square Garden, the Saturday night before Selection Sunday. Now, UConn, because of what happened last weekend, Houston, obviously in the middle of a 3-game losing streak, Iowa State losing at BYU, the door has opened for UConn to be the 4th number 1 seed, along with Duke, along with Michigan, and obviously along with Arizona. Now, with that said, if UConn is a 1 seed, it is going to be the 1 seed in the South region. Arizona is going out west. Michigan is going to be in the Midwest, and Duke is going to be in the East, unless something crazy happens. We know that. We understand that. So if you're UConn, are going to be on the 1 line if you're in the South, and the big storyline to watch from now until Selection Sunday, and we would expect Kelvin Sampson's squad to bounce back in a major way, but you would expect Houston to be the 2 seed in the South, barring something unforeseen. But for a couple of days, we have to remember, this is only February.